Hello, I made this quick video and recording just because I couldn't find some of the information on various other YouTubes and other information specifically about the fuel pump timing. But I'm just going to run through what I did and how I did it and how long it took me. So it's a Renault Trafic 2003 1.9 diesel. They're pretty much all the same until they changed into the cam chain engine, which I think is 2014, but I could be very wrong on that. So let's just go through what we did. We did the Cambelt and the water pump. So in the UK, offside front wheel off, jacked up, and with an axle stand, and then you'll take this inner cover off. There's two 13mm bolts here. We take those out, and there's a pipe which is the washer bottle pipe, so you just hook that out the way. Done. Okay, so then you've got access to the bottom pulley. Here I've already taken it off. You'll find there's a if you've this car or this van only had alternator and power steering pump, so there was no aircon pump, so it was very simple to get that off. There's a 16 millimeter tensioner bolt, so you can take the auxiliary bolts off. So two 13s, take that off, auxiliary belt, 16 millimeter spanner, done. And then bottom pulley is an 18 millimeter nut. Obviously the pulley is already missing here because I've already taken it off. You can actually get to the back of the flywheel and jam a screwdriver in to the teeth of the flywheel against the bell housing, and you can undo it manually. I did this all manually, no air tools, not even a hydraulic jack. I had to use a scissor jack. In total, with a cup of tea and going to the toilet and bits and pieces, I took my time 5 hours. But with this information, you should be able to do it in at least 4. I think book time is just over 3 for doing a Cambelt, and we did the water pump as well. Okay, let's go on to the next bit. So obviously, you're going to need another jack stand to support the engine. Little block of wood, so there's no digging in or anything. And then remove the bolts. So 16, 16, 16, 18. There's one down the side here, which is 18. And I also removed those other 3 to take that whole mount piece out of the way. Not particularly difficult. There is a slight bit of movement when you do take it off, but it's not a judder. All I did with the jack was just lifted it just so it was a bit of tension and nothing else. So that was fairly simple. You get that out the way. There's the power steering pump housing there. I moved it out the way, but I didn't really need to. It can stay where it is. I've heard of some people removing the front bumper, the front slam panel, headlights, etc. You don't really need to do that. You can get away without doing that. So support the engine, remove the top engine mounts. You're going to need 16 and 18 millimeter sockets and spanners. Okay, so I drain the coolant from the bottom hose. This is on the other side, so this is on the near side front. You can see the bottom of the rad here, and just above this pipe, there is the radiator coolant bottom hose with a big clip. So what I did was there's a panel in here. This is part of the inner wing. That can stay there. There's another panel exactly the same as the other side you remove to get to the bottom pulley. Take that off, and you can get better access depending on which position the clip is in, and then away you go. Drain that into a bucket, keep that. You can use it again. I filtered mine and put it back in, and yeah, obviously releasing your top cap would be a good idea, and leave the bucket there, leave the hose off, because as soon as you release the water pump bolts, you'll notice there's still a bit of vacuum in the engine and it will drain down. So yeah, so you might want a spare bucket just for when you pull the water pump off later. So anyway, so there's another 2 30mm headed bolts that gets you that access to that cover and removes. Okay, so we're going to remove the Cambelt cover also. There's 4 10mm bolts. Now the cover I had was almost like a fabric material, which is quite interesting. So it's very malleable and very pliable, but obviously you could break it quite easily, so don't be too aggressive with it. There is a timing hole to indicate, but because of the angle you can't see. You're going to need a mirror to put in position to see if you're in line or not. But because they're so loose and flap around, once the bolts are out, you can kind of put it on and off to see if it's lined up or not. But we'll get into the timing marks in a moment. Okay, so you've drained the coolant, and and on we go then. So there is no information I can find in the manuals and online about the diesel fuel pump timing. Now, I'm not a diesel expert, but I've had experience of when the timing's wrong, the thing runs badly, if at all. So I made sure this stayed in the same place. There was a previous white mark. There doesn't seem to be any marks on this. I think the Megane does actually have a little mark, but this engine I think comes from the Laguna. Anyway, so I marked it, and then I cleaned part of the housing there, and I marked it there, so I knew. And I also put black mark there and a black mark there, just so I knew I'd be either side of a tooth. So I just kind of went a bit overkill, but I wanted to make sure if something got rubbed or moved, then I had a backup. So yeah, rotating the engine by hand, I put the nut back in the crank, I rotated the engine till I get exactly where I wanted it. Now this is an interesting thing here. So using the keyway on the crank, not on the teethed pulley, use that is lines up between two pieces here. You can see there's a little piece here and a little piece here, kind of like the casting moldings. So it's very crude, but you line it up in between there. So it looks like it's ever so slightly off, but I imagine because the engine is actually at a slight angle, so it's not going to be vertical, if that makes sense. So you get that lined up, mark your pulleys on the pump and obviously on the cam. And then we can remove the water pump, then we can remove the tensioner, which I've done here. It's just a 16mm nut and washer, and off she comes. Pull it off, and then you can get the belt out the way. Once that's all out the way, then there's 5 bolts holding this water pump in, so out she comes. It will come out from the bottom or from the top, either way. I got to the bolts all from the bottom for everything down here because it was just easier. I was laying on my back, the van's only jacked up enough to get an axle stand under. There's quite a bit of room. Okay, so I made sure the pump was the same, had the same amount of bolt holes. Obviously these are flipped over, so you can't see, it looks exactly the same, but it is. There was this tiny casting that was different, like the ones you used to pry off, but apart from that, it was all the same. So a bit of silicone on the pump to hold the gasket on, and then I put a bit of silicone on the housing after I cleaned it with a razor blade to scrape off, and then a little bit of sandpaper just to rough up the surface. Good. There are 2 short stubby. These are M6 bolts, so the 10mm heads. There's one up here, one here, one here, and then there's 2 on this side. Now they're much shorter. But what I notice is that they go into the block, so a little dollop of silicone in those holes is not going to be a problem. It's probably going to be a good idea. So I smeared some silicone around the block on there, not heavy, but just enough to give me a bit of reassurance. So the 2 shorter ones seem to go here. There's a slightly lower profile here. Okay, there's our tension. I've put it in place just to see how it all lines up and make sure it looks good. But I actually won't put the tensioner in until the belt is all lined up. Okay, so I've got the belt going in place. The nice thing with the new belts, they come with a cam timing mark and a crank timing mark, but nothing for the fuel pump, which again, I can't find any information. Very odd. There's nothing to mention in the book. Somebody might tell me, oh yeah, there's no problem with those pumps, they can just go any old way, there's some sort of electronic control. Okay, well that's cool, but I marked it anyway, and it starts and runs, and that's where we're at the moment. So I'm checking my marks before it's all going back together. Obviously you have to slip the belt through this little gap here to get it down the bottom, but it's not an issue. There's plenty of room. Okay, so here the tensioner on the cam belt has got like a little hard point that can be screwed into to push onto the belt, push onto the tensioner, which then pushes onto the belt. Here's the cam at the top. So what I actually found, because I needed a long M6 bolt, was this is brilliant. This is from a Ford Fiesta, 2005 Ford Fiesta. It's the cup screw that holds the spare wheel in place. So I borrowed that, and it worked perfectly. So, or any M6 bolt, but obviously there's plenty of room around there. You can get your hand up, in, and around, and it's not an issue. So once I'd got my belt on and tensioned up, locked nice and tight here with the spanner only, 16mm headed bolt, nut, sorry, and a nice big washer there. So I turned the crank over. Now you'll notice I put the nut in the crank to turn over. So I turned it over 4 times. I actually did it 8 times. I wanted to just go through it a couple of times and just make sure the belt tension was how I wanted it. I did tweak it a little bit and then go back and rotate it a few more times. So that's it. The belt's done. The water pump's done. Everything's now just got to go back together. So Cambelt cover under. 4 bolts. That can go on, and then the auxiliary belt can go on. Make sure that's all buttoned up. I didn't put any of the covers on, like on the 2 wheel arch covers. I didn't put those on until later. Coolant in. There's 2 small screws on. Now if we go into the engine, this is a turbo pipe, but just off to the side here you'll see 2 pipes that go to the heater matrix. Now if you unscrew those, it will bleed out there. Highest point, obviously the air will come out to the top. So once I was pretty happy with that, there was still a little bit, there was still probably about a litre left to go. So I started it up, it started perfect. I was very, very happy. And that was that. One thing I did have to do, whilst we've got this crank thing here, I did have to just ever so slightly, because this is such a crude mark between here and here, I did just move it ever so slightly so that my belt popped into place perfectly. Because there seems to be a little bit more scope for being in the right place, and it started fine. Obviously my cam and my fuel pump didn't move, so I was very, very happy with that. And that's the end of it. So if you have any questions, please let me know.